Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Elisa Permain. I'm Claire Permain's daughter. Hi, Mom. This video I'm making is for you and your friends at Newbury Court, and I really hope that everyone is feeling well and staying safe, and I just want you to know that you're all the bravest people that I know, and I so look forward to seeing you all in person again. But in the meantime, I would like to tell you some of my favorite stories. Some of them are Mom's favorite stories that I hope will keep your imaginations alive and give you some fun and food for thought. So, the first story for today is a story from South Korea. Once upon a time, an old man and an old woman lived in a small house at the edge of a village and at the foot of the foothills. Now, when they were younger, they never had the good fortune of having children, though they tried, and so in their old age, they still had to work for themselves. Even though the old man's back was bent and sore, he still had to climb up into the foothills with his axe and had to chop the wood. And even though his breath was short, often he had to gather the wood and carry it to town to sell it. And even though the old woman's hands were bent and pained, she had to work in the garden and to sew and mend for the people of the town. But neither of them complained. They loved their friends and neighbors in the town, and they did everything they could to help them. And everyone loved them. Everyone, that is, except their greedy neighbor, for he lived behind a great locked gate, and although he didn't have children, he had servants to attend to his needs. And he often criticized the shabby shape of their house and their roof, which was indeed in need of repair. But they didn't pay him any mind. They just said, "Hello, dear neighbor," and did what they could to help him if he was in need. Well, one day, the old man put on his A-frame wooden backpack and slung his axe over his shoulder and kissed his wife goodbye and headed up into the foothills where he was going to cut some more wood. He got a short distance and his breath felt short, and so he sat to try and catch up, and he saw a beautiful little bird that he'd never seen before light on a tree, and he said, "Oh, my friend, how lovely you are. Would you sing for me?" And indeed, the bird sang. "Oh," he said, "that's a lovely song. Oh, sing more." But the bird instead flew off up the path, and he followed. "Bird, I can barely keep up, but sing again. I felt so happy to hear you." And the bird sang. "Oh, my friend, you make me feel as if I were young again. I heard you in my youth." And the bird flew up further up the path, and they came to the place where he'd been cutting the day before, and he took off his backpack and put down his axe, and the bird flew on, and he said, "Oh, my friend, I should let you go, but I just want to hear the song one more time." And he followed the bird further up the path and sat and caught his breath, and the bird sang, and then the bird flew again, and he followed, and he continued to follow the bird up the hill and down the other side until the woods gave way to a beautiful rolling meadow. And the bird took off and flew about halfway down the meadow to an outcropping of rocks. And there she called, "All right, my friend, I'm going to follow you one more time, just one more time, and I've got to get to my work." And so he made his way slowly down to the rocks, and he sat and he said, "All right, I've earned some song." But the bird didn't sing this time. Instead, it cocked its head as if listening. And then the old man heard it, the unmistakable sound of fresh water burbling up from an underground spring. Oh, he said, how did you know? I need water almost as much as I need your song. And he knelt down and he cupped the cool, fresh water in his hands and he drank. Oh, that is so good. I think I'll have. Ooh, maybe I won't have more. Feel like I do after too many glasses of red rice wine. And so he sat against the rock. He said, I just will rest here a minute and then I'll be back to work. The old man fell asleep and he slept all day as the sun crossed the sky. It wasn't until the sun fell down behind the trees that he finally woke up. But meanwhile, his wife was at home and she was beside herself, for never had the old man come back later than midday for his meal and his rest, and now the sun was going down, and where was he? And she was so worried that something had happened to his heart or he had fallen. And she went to the neighbors next door and knocked on that locked gate and called for the neighbor himself to come out. And she said, please, could you lend me a couple of servants to go up and find my husband? I'm afraid he has hurt himself and he hasn't come home. That's probably a tiger took him. Don't say that. I need your help, please. I cannot lend servants now. Why, soon they'll be preparing my meal and then my bath. You should come back tomorrow. Tomorrow? She went home and she fixed herself a lantern and put her shawl on and put a great machete in her belt, and she started making her way up the path. Now, meanwhile, as I said, when the sun went down behind the trees, the old man woke up. Oh, look at the sun, and he jumped up, and then he said to himself, I just jumped up. Oh, I haven't felt this good. My legs, they worked. Oh, it's so late, my poor wife. Oh, and he said, I better run. And he was amazed that he could run. He could run up that hill. And oh, he said, this is wonderful. Thank goodness my body is working today. And he ran back to where he had been cutting the day before, and he filled up his A-frame with wood, and he easily slung it on his back, picked up his axe, and headed for home, just as it was completely dark. Just as his wife was coming up the path. And as she came up the path, she heard the most boisterous singing. And she called out, Who's there? Who's there? And what have you done with my husband? And the old man said, What are you talking about, wife? It's me here. Look at me. And she looked at his face. It was the face of the man she had married 50 years before. She said, Husband, what has happened to you? You're young again. Oh, he said, no wonder I feel so good. It must have been the spring that, he told her about the bird and the spring. And he said, Wife, this is wonderful. And he picked her right up in the air. He said, You'll never have to work again. Oh, this will be great. And she said, You're right, husband. This is great. But what will the neighbors think? And he laughed and he said, You are brighter than I. Of course, I will take you tomorrow, and you shall be young again too. And indeed, the next day, he took his wife to the spring, and she knelt and she drank. And she slept. And all day the husband watched as the sun crossed the sky and the years fell away from her face, until they touched the trees, and she too woke up. Oh, I feel great. Oh, husband, this is wonderful. And they danced around the field together, and they said, We'll start our lives again, and this time we'll do even better. We'll do more for others. We'll have a wonderful life. And he said, Yes, and maybe this time we shall be fortunate enough to have children. She said, We may, husband. But let us not lose sight of that peace and acceptance that we found with what life gave to us. Oh, wife, you're right. You're much wiser than I. Come, And they went home, and indeed they fixed their roof and fixed up their house and doubled the size of their garden and increased the amount of wood and helped their neighbors and friends evermore. And their neighbor took sight of what had happened. Oh, he came over. Hello. See, good fortune has shone upon you, and I'm wondering if you might share your good luck with the poor old man with a bad back and terrible knees. They said, of course. And they told him about the fountain, and they were just about to tell him about how much when he took off and went up the path and was gone. Well, they thought no more about it until late that night when there was a knock on their door. Have you seen our master? He went off and hasn't returned. We know where he is, they said, and we'll bring him back. And so, taking lanterns and machetes, the husband and wife went up the forest path and down to where the field opened up to the valley, and there was a big moon, and they could see that outcropping of rock, and they could see a shadow lying next to it, and they were about to walk toward it when they heard a sound like a cry of an animal, and they both pulled out their swords, their machetes, and they said, "Move, go away, beast!" But no animal moved. And then they heard that cry again, only this time it was unmistakable. Wah, wah, wah. It was the cry of a newborn baby, and they ran forward, and there on the ground in the folds of the greedy neighbor's clothing was a tiny, brand new baby. Husband, the wife said, "It looks like our neighbor drank a little too much of the spring water, and he is a baby." And then they both had the same idea at the same time. Can we keep him? And they did. And they raised him up, but this time with their values of generosity and respect. And this time he grew into a fine young man, a young man who cared for his parents until their old age. That was a story that my friend Carla, who went to South Korea to teach English, brought back for me in a book of Korean folktales. And I feel very fortunate to have found it. I think a lot and write a lot about forgiveness, and I love that the greedy neighbor got a second chance, didn't he? Like we all deserve and need. Well, I thought I would tell a story that I never tell, but because of Mother's Day, I thought it would be fun. It's a story from Antonio Sacra, and originally is done in Spanish. So it will be a little rough, but I think it's just got a lovely message for mothers. So once upon a time, in a little house, down in the basement, there lived a family of mice, a papa mouse, a mama mouse, and two little boy and girl children mice. One day they decided to go out and have a picnic in the backyard of this house. And they ate their little sandwiches and had their little drinks, and then the kids said, "Can we go play in the yard?" And Mama and Papa said, "Yes, but be very careful. Don't go near that fence, because on the other side of that fence lives a great big cat, and that cat would love to eat little mice children." "Okay, Mama, okay, Papa." And they went along and they looked in the bushes and they played around, but gradually, as children do, they found their curiosity was taking them straight over to that fence. And they looked through the cracks in the fence, and they could see that great big cat lying in the sun, asleep. And they couldn't help themselves. They wanted to see if they could get that cat to wake up. And so they said, Gato! That means cat in Spanish. Gato, wake up! Silly looking gato! Well, the cat looked like it was still sleeping, but that big old tail started going up and down. What's the matter, gato? Are you too big and fat and lazy to get up? Get up! The tail started going even faster up and down. I said, what's the matter with you, lazy old fat cat? Well, that was enough for the cat, and it slowly made its way up into its hind legs and its front legs, and it stretched out the way cats do. And it looked through the fence. It could see those two little mice. It said, and it started to back up, and to back up, and to back up. And then it sprang for the top of the fence, but its claws just scraped down. And the little mice were saying, look at you, you can't jump. Banana poo-poo, you can't jump. Well, the cat went back a little further, and a little further, and a little further, and then it ran and it jumped to the top, but again it slid down. Oh, the children thought this was hilarious. Fat cat, you can't jump over the fence. Well, this time the cat went back so far and ran so hard that it jumped right up to the top of the fence and right over and down and right in front of the children. The children screamed, and they started running back to where their parents were sitting on the blanket, and their parents jumped up and they grabbed the children and put them behind them, and the mama was out in front. And she looked at that big cat coming right up towards them, and she knew she had to protect her children, but she didn't know what to do against that huge cat that was just licking its lips, saying, "Arr." And she thought from deep down, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And at last she opened her mouth and out came, woof, woof, woof. And that big cat just jumped up in the air, turned around and ran and jumped right back over that fence. And the kid said to her, Mama, what was that all about? She said, I've always told you kids, it's good to know a second language. That's the story of a wonderful protective mama like all of you. And now, let me take another little sip of tea, and then I'd like to tell a story about a grandmother. My grandmother, one of them, my dad's mom, because many of you are grandmas as well, and I don't think there's a special Grandmother's Day, but every day is Grandmother's Day because you're so special. So here's a story about me and my grandma. We called her Gamma. Well, when I was little, my parents loved to dance. They were great waltzers, and every night almost after dinner, especially on the weekends, we would pull back the rugs and put on the record player and we would dance. First, I would be waltzing on my dad's shoes when I was really little, and then they taught us to do the foxtrot, and then they put on jazz music like the Music Man, and we would make up little tunes and we would dance around together. And then the Beatles came along and we taught my parents how to do the twist. So dance was always a big part of my life, and I began at a young age making up dances and dance theater skits for my cousins and my siblings to take part in, and it all felt very wonderful and creative to me. But I had this idea in my head back then that creativity meant that you were good with paint and paper and things like that, like my sister Vicky. And if any of you have been to my mom's apartment, you know that she has a little museum of Vicky's work. She's a very talented oil and watercolor painter. And everyone said that Vicky was creative. And somehow I got it in my mind that there could only be one creative person per family. So I decided, as the oldest, I better settle for being responsible. But there was a place where I had my creativity, my dance creativity, especially appreciated, and that was in my grandmother Gamma's great big living room, with Gamma as the sole audience. And I remember one time when I was about 6 years old that my cousin Wendy and I were spending the night at Gamma's. And she was a wonderful cook. She made us canned spaghetti and frozen peas in her brightly yellow painted kitchen. And then after dinner, we helped her to wash up the dishes. And then we ran out of the kitchen into the dining room and around the table and up to the old grandfather clock. And we loved to watch it go back and forth. And we got so into the grandfather clock that Gamma got ahead of us going up the curving wooden stairs to her second floor. So we had to hold in all that kid energy until she slowly, step by step, had climbed the stairs and gotten through the threshold into the living room. And she went and sat on the couch underneath this great tapestry. And we went and ran around the room. We closed the ceiling to floor wooden shutters on the 3 windows, turned on the lights, and flopped down on the middle of the oriental rug. And we looked over at our Gamma. Gamma picked up her mending. Now, Gamma was one of the most generous people in the world, and I was sure of it. And an example of it was her mending. For every week, she would go down the hill to Charles Street, and she would walk along the brick sidewalks until she got to the thrift store. And then she would go in and she would fill up 2 shopping bags from the racks and the barrels of clothes that needed mending. She would come back to her house. She would mend the clothes and give them to the nuns in the convent across the way to distribute. So Gamma was doing her mending, and Wendy and I said, "What do you want to do? What should we do? Let's put on a dance performance for Gamma." "Yeah, what should we be?" "I have an idea," I said. "Come on." And we jumped up, squealing as children do, and ran out of the living room, down the hall, past the library, into a second dark hall that led to the back of the apartment where she had her mysterious bedroom. We loved it because it had smelled like clothes that had been in closets for 50 or 100 years. I said, "Okay, what are we going to be?" And I whispered in her ear, "Let's be..." "Yes," she said. So to prepare, to get our proper costumes on, we began taking off our socks and our shirts and our undershirts and our pants and our underpants. And when we were totally naked, we said, "We better go in Gamma's bathroom and pee before the performance," which is always something to keep in mind. So we went into Gamma's bathroom, which we loved. It had a clawfoot tub and it had a pull chain toilet. And we just loved that, pulling that chain. So we would pull the chain and watch it go down and pull it again. And there was also a powder puff that smelled just like Gamma. So we pulled and powdered ourselves and peed and pulled and powdered until we couldn't do it anymore and we were all ready. I said, "Yeah, ready? Let's go." And on bare feet, we tiptoed down the creaking wooden floors of the hall till we got just to the outside of the living room. We looked at Gamma. She looked so small, working on her sewing. And we said, "Ready, set, go!" And we sprang like 2 gazelles, singing at the top of our lungs, "We're Adam and Eve! We're Adam and Eve!" And we danced around the rug and pretended to eat from the fruit of the garden and danced and nuzzled each other and danced. And Gamma put her mending in her lap and she began to applaud. And she said, "Oh, you girls are wonderful! You're wonderful! Just beautiful! Look at you!" And we danced more and more. And she said, "I've never seen anything so creative in my entire life. You girls are fabulous." And we danced and nuzzled and ate from the trees until we could do it no more. And we went and sat at the foot of the tree of life, the feet of our dear grandmother. She said, "Girls, you were wonderful." And she picked up her mending and went back to work. And I know I heard Gamma's praise many times as a child. Unfortunately, she died when I was 17, and that was around the time when it felt like all that creativity just went way underground and stayed there for a long time. But just around the time I turned 30, I began to dance again and to join dance theater group and to realize that I was actually a storyteller. And I remember before my first performance, knowing that I was going to go out there, and I felt so naked going out there and showing myself, my creativity to the world, and fear of not being loved. And it was then that I remembered Gamma and her words of praise when she said, "You're so creative, you are wonderful, just wonderful." And it gave me courage. And I found as a storyteller, I worked in the Boston public schools for about 10 years, helping the kindergarten through 5th grade students learn to tell stories from their own cultures. And I remember channeling her voice and telling them how wonderful and creative they were as well. And that's a story I call Gamma's Praise. So thank you to all you grandmothers. Let's see. There is a story that my mom likes, and it comes from India. So once upon a time, there was a king who ruled over vast areas of land. He had many servants and many advisors and great wealth and huge, vast amounts of land. But there was one advisor that he most valued. For this little diminutive fellow always gave him good advice and was ever loyal. But he did have one odd habit, for no matter what you said to him, he would always answer in the same way. He would put his finger in the air and he would say, "Ah, that is good." You could tell him, "The crops are failing for the 3rd year in a row," and he would say, "Ah, that is good." You could tell him enemy soldiers are approaching, and he would say, "Ah, that is good." And the king found it annoying, and he often wanted to say, "That is very annoying." But he held his tongue because, as I said, this man was ever loyal, always by his side, and the advice that he gave always proved to be true. Until one day, it was the dry season, and the king and his advisors had gone out on horseback into the jungle hunting. The air was thick with moisture and the hum of insects, and the foliage was close. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a great serpent dropped from a tree branch right in front of the king's horse. The horse reared up and then bucked the king off, but the king kept the reins. And so the horse dragged him in and out of the trees and in and out of the trees until at last he lost the reins. His foot stuck on a root and he fell to the ground. The advisors jumped off their horses and went to his side, and they saw that his boot had been pulled off his foot and his big toe had been severed. "Oh, Your Highness," they dropped to their feet. "I'm so sorry. This is the most terrible thing. How awful." One of them even said, "I wish it had happened to me." But what do you think that little advisor said? He said, "Ah, that is good." But this time the king, he turned bright red. He said, "How can you say it is good? When a king loses his big toe, there is nothing good about it. You're a fool. It's just been luck all this time. I don't want you anywhere near my sight. You're fired. Go and work in the stables. I never want to see you again." And the little advisor turned to go. But as he did, the king distinctly saw him put his finger in the air and say, "Ah, that is good." "Ah, what an idiot he is," said the king. Well, they got the king back to the palace and bandaged up his foot, and in time he learned to walk without the aid of a big toe, and things seemed to be not going too badly. And then one day the king decided it was time to go explore the vast boundaries of his land. And so again with servants, not his dear advisor, but servants and some advisors, they went out and they traveled for several days until they came to a place where all of a sudden they heard hoots and hollers coming from across the border. And this tribe of men came straight at them, and they all scattered. And the tribesmen went straight for the king, seeing him in his regalia. And they pulled him down from his horse, and they dragged him back to their village. They planned to sacrifice him in a ceremony. They stripped him down, they painted and oiled and feathered him, and they tied him to a pole in the center of the village. The king's heart was madly pounding as he could hear the sound of drums beating, and then he saw a man equally painted and feathered coming towards him with a great machete and waving it this way and that. And the man went and he danced and he looked at him from all angles. And at last he said, "Stop! This one is no good. We cannot sacrifice to our God one who has already been cut." And he pointed to the king's missing toe. And then with his sword he cut the king free, and the king hobbled back into the forest where he managed to find his men. Well, it took several days to get back to the palace, but when the king did, he had his old advisor brought from the stables, and he said to him, "Man, you were right. It was good that I lost my toe, for if I had still had it, I would have been sacrificed in a ceremony. But how on earth did you know that it was good when I fired you from your job?" "Oh, Your Highness," he said, "I didn't know that it was good. I can't see into the future. But I do trust that no matter what happens, always something good comes from it. I had no idea what that would be until today, for you see, you remember how loyal I was to you, and if I'd been with you, I would have stayed with you and followed you to that village, and seeing as I'm in possession of all my fingers and toes, I am sure I would have been next in line for that sacrifice." "Ah," said the king, "you are right. That is good, and you are good, and you shall rule beside me forevermore." And he did. And from then on, no matter what happened, good or bad, the two would put their fingers in the air and say, "Ah, that is good." And now I should tell you that my mother doesn't let me get away with any complaining, for if I try, she will say to me, "Ah, that is good." And I certainly don't mean to make light of the troubles that we're all having right now. There's so much that is painful and so much suffering and so much fear. But I know it helps me very much to think about the good that is going on in the world and the very many, many people who have done wonderful, generous things, from making the masks to raising money to risking their lives in so many, many ways to be there, to things like you all just checking in on people that you care about and calling people like Mom does, who just to make sure everybody's doing all right, and it's a wonderful thing. So I would just like to end with one little story that touched me from the news, which is about a 99-year-old man from Great Britain, and you may have heard this story. His name was Captain Tom. He was in World War II in India, and he was about to turn 100 on April 30th, and he decided he would like to raise money for the National Health Institute, which was is very much struggling right now to keep up with the need for the ventilators and all the health care that people need. So he decided that he was going to walk 100 times back and forth in his garden with his walker. And the garden, I saw pictures of it, is more like a cement back terrace. And he said that if he could walk 100 times by his birthday, he wanted to raise 1,000 pounds, which is equal to about about $1,250. So he went back and forth, and people started hearing about it, and they started contributing to his fund. Before he knew it, he had raised over 2 million pounds, and he kept going and going, and the Queen heard about it, and the army. And on the final day, on his birthday, when he was walking his final rounds, they had soldiers standing on either side of the terrace as he walked, and they had a flyover of jet planes and all kinds of things, and everyone in that nation really rooting for him. And he made it with his walker back and forth and all his medals on him, and he just looked so proud. And he never dreamt that he could raise what I think turned out to be over 3 million pounds for the National Health Institute. So you never know what we can do, and if we focus on what is good, the human spirit coming together, I think it boosts our spirits. And I certainly hope this time of story has boosted your spirits, and that you'll recall maybe some of your favorite childhood memories or stories of your grandchildren, and will write them down and share them with others. So take care of yourselves. Much love and best wishes. Bye-bye.